Losing time, I'm fading fast. I just wanna make it last. Try to let go of the past. I close my eyes, embrace the blast. Sleepless nights and headaches stack. Restlessness to hell and back. What's my purpose? What do I grab? A slippery surface, a heart attack. And sometimes you just gotta believe there's something that'll.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science. In this episode we will deal with the number 2 what the F moment in the Chris Watts case. This is arguably worse than the first one mentioned. For me, the main difference between the first one and this one is in the first one you sort of have 4 people sitting in a room. It's the moment that a really big sort of monster is sort of ushered into the room, which is that a whole family are dead, not just one person, and it's not even as though one person being dead is a big enough deal, but it's basically 4 people. 4 people are dead, right? One of them unborn, and you've got 2 of their family members sitting talking about it. 2 important high-profile agents, one from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, one from the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, sitting in on this. And while this is going on, you've got the dad kind of taking it in his stride, taking the affair in his stride, taking the murders in his stride, and quickly sort of gearing up to, put the blame on Shanann, provide them with kind of an excuse to think that it was her. That's why for me that's quite a strong moment of craziness. It just doesn't seem like sanity. It seems like mental illness. It seems like something is missing. It seems like a screw is loose. It seems like man's humanity to man is missing, and it's missing to such an extent that when something like that happens, not only are the emotions missing, but people seem to be unable to see that, wow, you're not going to believe my ridiculous story as well. So that's why that's number 1. But there's certainly a case to be made that the disposal of the children in the hatches is the worst part of this case, and we'll get to that in a moment. Before that, please subscribe to the channel. Comments are all welcome, especially constructive criticism and feedback and just information. Did you know, whatever. So please like, subscribe, share within your networks, and let's get going. One thing that I would certainly be interested in crowdsourcing from you guys or from the people out there is the photograph of the refrigerator sensor. I can't remember ever seeing it. I know that it was mentioned in the discovery. Has anyone seen that photograph that he took of the sensor? It's difficult to say what the significance is of that photo, except that the photo was taken within hours of the murders, and also the refrigerators are in the basement, and looks like a lot of evil and dark deeds took place in the basement. So the fact that the refrigerators are there and he must have opened the door and photographed the sensor, that's interesting. Something else that it would be good to get your thoughts on is there a freezer, one of those rectangular freezers where people sort of just put frozen products in, but they're sort of quite big and they're kind of horizontal. I don't think there's one in the basement, but there might be one in the garage. There certainly are even larger bins in the garage, but they sort of look more like disposal bins. Has anyone noticed a horizontal refrigerator somewhere? In any event, let's move on to the disposal in the tanks. You may remember at the sentencing hearing, Frank Rusek talking about, with obvious disgust, talking about how Watts took Shanann and the children out like trash. That he treated their bodies like garbage. And obviously in that scenario, Frank was kind of revealing the fact that he knew, based on what he'd been told, based on what had been discussed with them by the prosecutors, that their thought was that the whole family had been killed in the home. And so that was his assumption too. Interestingly, when Chris Watts admitted to something else, it seems like Frank and the family took that on without any interference from the district attorney. The district attorney didn't call to say, well, don't believe that. It seems like the Ruseks were sort of on their own at that point. If you take the psychology of a premeditated crime and what's taking the victims out of the house in garbage bags, and then Shanann in a sheet with the children in garbage bags, and then dumping them the way that he did, it kind of lines up. It kind of lines up this thing of wanting to get rid of these things that were obstacles to what he wanted. He no longer saw them as people, he saw them as just as garbage, right? If you take the current situation, the current spiel, which is that the murder of the children happened at the well site, that is kind of, and the fact that he had sex with Shanann before killing her, both these scenarios kind of give them a different impression, kind of gives the impression that he didn't think of them as garbage, he didn't want to get rid of them, and if you believe the situation where he only decided at the well site what he was going to do, why drive Shanann to work? Why not drive anywhere else? Just, like he was going all along the country, he was going on a highway right through the country. There were plenty of places just to throw her, and I say this with respect, I mean, we're talking about Shanann, we're talking about someone who was a person, but after death, in the context of crime and of true crime, getting into the criminal headspace, why wouldn't he just dispose of her body anywhere along the route? He could have thrown her into the Platte River, which was something he drove over. He could have thrown her body in a ditch anywhere. He could have dug a hole in any sort of open piece of countryside. Why the well site? He didn't have to drive to the well site that day with his children. He could have gone anywhere else. So if you take the psychology that he did drive there the way that he said, and that he killed the children at the site, that's quite a rapid escalation from not knowing what to do to killing them to then disposing their bodies in the tanks. And I think you can only have that kind of callousness with a very long, deep, thorough premeditation. In other words, Watts had resigned himself to what he was going to do long before he did it. And I believe that he was already on the way to this idea of dumping his children in the tanks by Friday. That was when he called his co-workers and got the fire stick and found out about the leak at Survey 319. So he had Friday night, the whole of Saturday and most of Sunday to think about what he wanted to do and to be completely resigned to it. It may not even be resigned. He may have been excited about the idea or thinking it was a great idea or looking forward to, getting it done, and making sure that he did it on schedule or whatever it was. And so long before they actually were killed, he was thinking of them as garbage. He was thinking how to get rid of them, where to get rid of them, right? When I initially came across the doll image, my first thought was that the doll was used to kind of measure the to almost as a practice run of putting the children through a similar sized orifice, and that maybe it used a plastic bag to sort of how can I put it, either transport the bodies in that or to use the plastic to facilitate the body going through some kind of opening. That was just the gut feel that I had. I also thought, covering the head, which is one of the most irregular, if you take the head, neck and shoulders, it's a very sort of irregular sort of shape to be going through a narrow circle. And so covering that with plastic might, again, facilitate the easy pushing through of the bodies. If I can compare it to, sometimes when you want to put a piece of string or a piece of cotton or a thread through a needle, it can fit through, but you need to make sure that the point, that little tuft or little hair at the tip of the thread, that is, meeting the hole in the needle or whatever little hole you're trying to get it through. It's going through the center of that. Get that wrong, and then everything else sort of won't fit through. And so one of the little tricks with that is you can lick it, you can make it moist, and that kind of straightens it out and streamlines it. And so one wonders whether that was part of his thinking, because he had to feel concerned, would he be able to do it? And then there's also the aspect of the clothing that the children were wearing. We didn't know this at the time, but it really didn't seem to make sense. Why on earth would the children, being intentionally put through these narrow holes at the top of the tanks, why would they still be wearing any clothing whatsoever? Because if the bodies were presenting a chance for sort of gumming up this hole, what about any clothing? Cotton bunching up and all that kind of thing. And this seems to be another aspect that just doesn't seem to show a genius, and it seemed like he was looking for trouble trying to. He just seemed like he was lazy. He wasn't thinking things through, and yet he succeeded in what seemed to be a crazy plan. He succeeded in actually getting these bodies through the hatch. Another aspect that I think one should consider is if the children were killed anywhere, in any murder you would expect blood traces, just because murder tends to be a physically stressful occurrence, right? The most physically stressful a person can experience. Your death is a physically traumatic experience. And whether or not the children were hurt when they were killed, and Watts is adamant that they weren't. There's a section where he's being asked about, did he do it, and he keeps saying over and over again, I did not hurt these girls, I did not hurt these girls. And I think that's true. I don't think he hurt them while they were alive. I don't think he hurt them when they were killed. But I think there should have been injury when they were put through these narrow orifices, and why wasn't there? There was with Bella, but not with Cece. And so how's that possible? How's it possible that skin wasn't ruptured, that there weren't post-mortem wounds or cuts? How's that possible? And I think there is an answer to that. I think the answer may be, and it's something that True Crime Rocket Science said fairly early on, that it does look like the bodies were put into the top of the tanks, but how could one do that? And so one of the early theories of True Crime Rocket Science was that there was some kind of processing involved, not some kind of grotesque thing where there was like a chemical bath and limbs were dissolved beforehand, not something like that, but something kind of in between, something like rubbing, and I apologize for the graphicness of the description, but putting some kind of lubricant or some kind of grease or whatever it was on the frames, and that then facilitating their movement through this hole. That's not necessarily processing, but it's certainly preparing, right? And then that's one option. Another option is refrigeration, is where there were two large vertical refrigerators in the basement, and the photograph of the sensor tells us that Watts was thinking about the refrigerator around about the time of the crime. And so is there some kind of mirroring psychology of these two big refrigerators, two little girls, and the two tanks at Survey 319? Because if you have a situation of the bodies being refrigerated, what that will do is it will sort of mummify them. It will sort of reduce the actual volume of the body somewhat, in the same way that when you freeze any kind of meat or food, it actually kind of contracts just slightly, but it would be enough in this case to allow for easier disposal. Again, I apologize for the graphic way that this is discussed, and it's also quite if one speaks in a casual way, that doesn't mean that what one's talking about isn't unpleasant. It certainly is, but we're trying to find out what happened and why there's no evidence. And one of the big aspects that was mysterious was the lack of smell. If the children were killed early on, why didn't they smell? And again, the refrigerator would answer that. But when we run through the narrative, I remember when HLN on TV sort of showed the shape, the size and the shape of the orifice on TV, it was pretty alarming. I mean, it was literally a little bit bigger than the size of the presenter's hand, sort of spread out, and you could barely see her face through this mock-up of the thief hatch, and that really put into perspective what we were dealing with. To end off, Chris Watts is a mechanic, and so I think that aspect is why some of the aspects of this crime are so physical and so technical in some ways. Um, and there's a sort of there's an aspect that doesn't seem human in terms of the whole oil industry and the construction industry. It sort of seems almost anti-human. It seems almost as if it's what's the word? Um, Dangerous to people, unsafe, hazardous, poisonous, destructive not just to human life but also to animal life, plant life, to the atmosphere and so on. And by the way, today on CNN, this is like a story. It's come out right now, October 23rd. There's a story on the cost of climate change and a trial to decide whether ExxonMobil was honest with investors. And it's all about how ExxonMobil apparently misled investors about the dangers of climate change regulations and fixing figures internally that were different from what was disclosed publicly. And the words calculated come up over and over again in this article. And but if you think about the psychology of these big companies that Watts worked for, it's also using technical data to mislead people, and people are easily misled using systems that they are unfamiliar with, and people were unfamiliar with these tanks and how they worked and so on. I recently had a simple problem with a water bottle falling out of a bicycle cage while doing some cycling training. Simple problem, and but it required getting the right size screws and getting the right sized cable ties, and for people who just involved in that every day, they know exactly what they are. But for someone who isn't, it's not like that. And the same applies in terms of the disposal of the bodies. It was very much a case that everyone was in the dark about it. The only people who would know that it was possible for a fact was Chris Watts, and maybe some of his colleagues. Even the FBI agents, even when he admitted it, they couldn't believe it. They found it disputable, and that's certainly an area that's also what the F in this case is, that even when it was known what he did, it was scarcely believable.
I don't really know what comes next. I'm just doing my best,